So welcome to then our fifth episode of Understanding Wisdom. And like I was just saying, wisdom, as we're approaching it here, is not it's not vague in any way and operates with logic. So that's now here where we've been talking a little bit around sort of the various, and it's very good to identify the positions within, you would say, the tradition of Madhyamaka. Now we are actually going into looking at some of the logic that applies when it comes to Madhyamaka. So please keep in mind that the reason why we're doing this is not just to, you could say, develop our, you could say, view, our sophistication in terms of all the smart things we could say or the opinions we might have, but we're doing this in order to gain insight, so we might be free from the delusion of samsara. And that insight is not a particularly Buddhist project. We're using the Buddhist path, but what we're uncovering is universal. So it's something that has relevance to the entire world. And hence what we're doing is not just about us, it's about others. So this is where we generate this motivation of bodhicitta. May I always benefit all sentient beings. May I never abandon a single sentient being. And that is the Bodhisattva vow. And that takes us out of a very, you could say, parochial and narrow view that I want to get out of here. And I'm entering into some spiritual dimension where I'm never coming back. This is very much one of the ultimate kind of altruism. So this is our motivation. I will study and integrate the middle way teaching to bring all sentient beings to perfect enlightenment. So we have our lineage masters here, Lord Buddha, Nagarjuna, Buddha Palita, Bhaviveka, Chandrakirti, Shantrakshita, and Kamala Shila, and our Tibetan lineage masters here, Rongsun Pandita, Longchen Ramjam, and specifically then Jamgun Mipam. And again, I'd like to really emphasize, if you have a chance to study Jamgun Mipam, please do it. It's so much of his writings are really key. And there's some very good, there's one that's called The Life and Teaching of Jamgun Mipam, which actually clarifies so much of his philosophy in a really accessible way. So again, as far as Madhyamaka goes, I'll cut the video at this point. Let's see if I can actually do that. Yeah. So we recap, what are we doing here? With Madhyamaka refutation, it's not just that we are saying, oh, I'd like to just practice the spiritual path. We're actually identifying that the spiritual path is a remedy for some flawed science, some bad assumptions. For example, you could say it's a really flawed science to believe that if somebody's mean to you, then to smash their face is a great way of feeling much better. It doesn't work, and that's an invalid position. And similarly also, if we were to, for example, think that, we have different positions on, for example, that, 100 years ago people thought it was a great idea to smoke tobacco. We know better now. And that's because we've invalidated that flawed science that endorsed tobacco as a great thing to do, tobacco smoking. So what we're doing with the Madhyamaka is also seeing that there's some flawed assumptions about reality that need to be exposed for what they are, bad science. Now, we have two approaches that we've been touching on here. The Prasangika Madhyamaka, well, all of them, they invalidate, or they you could say, invalidate some of our assumptions around a truly existing self and a truly existing object. And so the Prasangika Madhyamaka, what they do is, and this is very cool, they just show how any assumption around truly existent phenomena is flawed, and they don't say anything. They just prove you wrong. And then that's very good, because yes, what the Buddha was about was actually not to then develop a new idea, not simply just to relinquish clinging. So that's a very cool approach. But it also implies that you kind of know what the nature of what you're doing is all about, and hence it is regarded as the scope of the most, you could say, advanced. And it also is very important that we keep in mind that as we're approaching the path, ultimately, we're not about developing a new theory. But the Swatantrika, they, in using the same, you could say, invalidation of the idea of something that can be truly objectified or truly existing phenomena, they do it more so that we get an idea of what emptiness is about. And so they do operate with the idea of emptiness, which is what we've talked about as the countable absolute. So Khenchen Palden Sherab, he then would say, countable absolute truth that is verifiable through logic and reasoning. That is what we're doing here. And uncountable absolute truth that is not verifiable through logic and reasoning. This is ultimately what we accomplish and realize through the practice of the path, through practice of meditation and skillfully applying post-meditation. So you could say the first has more to do with the view, and the second has more to do with understanding the ultimate scope of what we're doing. And again, this is not just about philosophy, this is really about getting down to the cause of our suffering. So today's, then, we're beginning these 5 great reasonings of the Madhyamaka. So we're looking at the first reasoning, which is all about looking at what, so we're assuming that phenomena exist, right? Well, if something exists, there has to be something that caused it. We're assuming there's a real phenomena out there. Well, then there must be a real cause. And that's where we're then looking at the causation. So the implication is if there is a cause, we have something real. And if there's no real cause, what's real about what we're perceiving, right? Again, remember, we're just talking about in the absolute sense. We're not denying that, there's Sydney, there's Melbourne, there's New York City, there's us, there's them, all of that. And I was looking at Khenchen Rinpoche. I found an article that is from his work that's called Open Door to Emptiness, and I'll upload this. And he says, we will approach the notion of emptiness from the standpoint of how effects arise from causes. That's what we're doing now. We do this because phenomena certainly function according to a predictable successive pattern, with one condition arising out of another. Yeah, you could say samsara works. This is what Somsagen Rinpoche is always saying. That, so you could say, tricky about samsara, because yes, the logic, the ordinary logic of our reality, it seems to work, right? Nevertheless, the actual arising itself can never be discovered, because on an ultimate level, there is no reality to arise. And that's where we get tricked. Yes, things function, but it doesn't mean that they're any, the ultimate reality that we mistakenly attribute to phenomena. That's where we go wrong. And that's where there actually is no such an absolute reality. So what we do here, through careful analysis, we can gain an intellectual understanding of emptiness, which is very useful. If we have an intellectual understanding of emptiness, we can then develop faith and trust that meditation on emptiness is useful and does lead to realization. And that's it. This informs then our spiritual practice. So as far as this causation business goes, things arise. Generally, we could say they would arise from a sense of, it rises from itself. Yeah. Now, this is big, particularly in religion, because particularly when you come to India, it's not as if they thought that there was a big bearded man in the sky that sort of waved his magic wand and then everything occurred. But they would say, oh, the divine is in everything, Oh, then God is everywhere, huh? Okay, well, if God is everywhere and God has created everything, then actually there should be no difference between the creator and what has been created. So that's one position. So we're going to look at that first position, which is then creation from self. But there are some other ones. There's also the idea that something could be created from someone else. For example, people have children. Yeah, you'd say, well, if you ask somebody, where do you come from? You say, I come from my mama, and all of that. So these are the two positions. And then people can get a little bit sort of smug or slippery, and then if you say, well, is it from one, is the result coming from the self or from the other? And it says, well, it's from both, they're sort of just philosophers, right? Or then would say, no, it's beyond that, just doesn't have nothing to do with that. And that's where we do talk about this, I think they call it tetralemma, but it means that there's 4 possibilities. And that's where we, in the root text of the Madhyamaka, which is, you could say, Nagarjuna's work expounding wisdom, he says in the first verse of the first chapter, he says, neither from itself, nor from another, nor from both, nor without a cause does anything, whatever, anywhere arise. And many of us have also studied the Madhyamaka Avatara, in which Chandrakirti, in the 6th chapter on wisdom, he says, since not from self, from other, nor from both at once, nor yet without reliance on a cause, do things emerge. They are deprived of entity. Dense ignorance enshrouds the world as though by massing clouds. Because of this, phenomena are misperceived. And so these first 2 lines outline what these 4 are, just like Nagarjuna. And the last 2, they more talk about the ignorance that results in the misperception that is the basis for samsara. Now, as far as the first possibility of causation goes, that we could say, oh, well, yeah, phenomena, they arise from themselves. Yeah, we'd say everything is just arisen from the primordial matter, Well, if that's the case, there would be no difference between the cause and result. And we all know that's not quite the case. That would mean there's no difference between the cause and the result. That also would mean there's no difference between anything that you could say is processed. That means when our food and what comes out some hours later would be no difference, right? So that is not happening. That's also saying there's no difference between the little seed and the gigantic tree that comes out of it. Clearly, that's not a fact. In fact, we could say a cause would not even be named a cause, yeah, because there'd be no difference between the outcome and the original, you could say, basis for it. So we wouldn't call really a cause. It wouldn't be a cause of anything because the result would be the same, and also the result wouldn't be a result. It would be the same as the cause. Yeah. So just think in terms of seeds and the plants that come from them. That also means if there's no difference between the cause and the result, well, that means that the plant should be there at the time of the seed. Huh? Now, I was asked to give examples, and those who have studied Madhyamaka, they've heard a lot about rice seeds and rice plus, rice sprouts. But this is true, isn't it? If there was no difference, then yes, there we have a seed, and we should also see the rice sprout, Now, and so cause would be the cause of itself, and we would have an infinite regression. So the cause would just be the originator of itself. And the originator of the self, again, would be originating in that self again. And that would just be endless. Also, as far as if cause and result were the same, again, that means, well, then the result of the rice sprout would be the same. That means you wouldn't need sun or rain or the soil. And then causes would always produce causes, or they would never, and causes would never cease. Actually, I'm not sure if that's what I wanted to say. I might have wanted to write results. Causes would always be producing results because the causes would never cease. If you have if you had well, we can actually, that's substantiated by the next one, which is the seed would never cease, right? So when you have a seed, when there's a sprout that comes from it and eventually the plant, the seed is destroyed. Now, if they were inseparable, then the seed was already there, as the result was already present, then the seed would never change. And so it would reproduce endlessly because the cause would never cease. And then And why would there be any point in anything being produced, right? There would be no point. It would be absolutely pointless. Yeah. Why would what already exists reproduce? Yeah. If it's already the same, you know. So there's no difference between God and the reproduction. What is the world as such? Well, that means why would even God want to create the world if it already is inseparable from God? There'd be nothing to create. And that would mean the world already exists before it's created, or that the again coming back to the result would be there already at the time of the cause. So in fact, what we know, if we were to believe or we were to subscribe to this idea, then it would mean that the whole idea of something being, the whole idea of production or birth or rising would be utterly meaningless. We'd never even have that, but there would be no point. It's just to say that the idea of the result as inseparable from the cause is very problematic position. And why we're saying that is because there are these doctrines that would ascertain some absolute value to some cosmic whatever. And so actually if you studied Madhyamaka, and I must say this is where I've happily forgotten all about, this is refuting the Samkhya position, which would say that God is in everything, and then they have various kinds of because I substantiate this philosophy. But the bottom line is that, and we have it more in our culture in terms of God, right? So this is a position that's refuted, and it's a very kind of, you could say, somewhat religious position. The second one is more, you could say, it has more to do with the general views of the world, and it's very close to what we normally think, our logic, that things arise from other. But when we say other, see, this is where, we basically would say all phenomena, whatever arises, they arise due to, like we said, seed and sprout and result, right? Now, for something to be truly other, the seed actually is there at the time of the cause, but then it becomes the sprout and the plant. Now, to say that these two are other is actually somewhat problematic. You know, for us to experience other, if we're thinking of something in the past, like say I experience another person, you guys out there, right? If I was to just think of you in the past, then that would just be my thoughts. Now you're out there. There's actually something that's existing right now in terms of time and space as being an other. And so when we say other, something arising from other, we mean it really has to be completely different. And for something to be completely different, it actually has to be present in the same temporal space, in the present. So that's the premise for this refutation, that when we say other, it necessarily has to be something that's coexisting. If results would arise from something essentially other, then we can ask ourselves, is there a cause and result relationship? Because if it is something that exists already, if we have right now the cause coexisting with the result, is it really then they're actually already both there? Cause and result are already present. So there's not really any kind, because see, with cause and result, you necessarily have to have a progression in terms of time. So the idea of cause and result as being present simultaneously is simply illogical, and hence also the idea of causation from other is illogical. I'm just going to substantiate this with something from Khenchen Palden Sherab, and I'd really recommend that thing I uploaded. The thing I uploaded from Khenchen Palden Sherab, I forget the title, but it's very good, and it's essentially, you can say, the Madhyamaka reasoning, where he goes through what we're studying here. He says in regard to this second refutation, he says the only way you can really say that two things are other than one another is if they coexist, if they are present simultaneously. That is, if you want to distinguish one thing from another, the two things must be present at the same time. So that's a premise for the idea of us identifying production from other. Otherwise, yes, then relatively we're fine with that rice sprouts arise from rice seeds, but they don't, the seed and the sprout don't exist at the same time. It's just to say that the idea of other is problematic. And rather what we would say is independency. See, we're not really going out of our way to sort of say something particularly weird or extraordinary. We're just coming back to the dependency that phenomena don't have an essence, and as such there's no, you'd say, intrinsic quality in the cause. The second possibility then of that things would arise. Oh, sorry, it's bad. Yeah, still on that second one. So when we would, if we were to say that the other is permanent, then we would necessarily be looking at, then we would look at, is that other then? Is it something permanent or impermanent? For example, coming back to the actually we have it in Aristotle, who talks about the first mover, and then does the first mover move, or is that the idea is that would be a permanent, and the first mover is then permanent, but what is moved is then something that moves. Obviously God doesn't move, but then what he creates moves. So there's a whole discussion around that in Western philosophy, in Aristotle. Now if the permanent cause produced results, so then we're looking at then permanent. Yeah. Now if a permanent cause produced results, then we're looking at it from 2 points of views then. Does the result then develop instantly or gradually? Yeah? So that's as far as the permanent option goes. There's 2 possibilities, instantly. So if it's instant, then actually then there would be no difference between the cause and the result. And again, we have the same illogical situation again, where cause and result being the same. That's not anything that could qualify as production. Yeah, seed and you could say seed and sprout being present at the same time. No, then there's nothing really that's happening. There's no production taking place. If a permanent cause produced a result gradually, the cause could not be permanent, right? Because if it's something in which the seed is gradually then becoming, and that's what happens, isn't it? It becomes a sprout. If that's, then we can no longer can talk about the cause as being something that's permanent. The seed is really not permanent. It's very highly impermanent. It becomes sprout. So that's as far as permanent causation goes. Now, if we were then to ask impermanent causes, if we were to say that impermanent cause produce results, then past or future, that actually means that there's not really any kind of other there, because that's past. We can't have the, like we said before, the premises that it takes place in the present. Yeah. So past or future excludes really that the cause being an other. Yeah. It's not other from the result. For it to be other from the result, it has to be in the present. And then again, in the present, then again implies that if it was there, then again, what would actually be reproducing? The same situation would be there. Now, the thing is, what we're saying here, and this is again, we're not saying something particularly weird or extraordinary. We're just refuting this idea that there should be some intrinsically different other. Of course, what really happens is that phenomena, yes, they arise from something that is other, meaning the seed gives rise to the sprout, but it's not as if that is ultimately other. It's just, you could say, conventionally. So relatively, yes, the seed and sprout, they are other. And so we do actually say that things do arise, but they're also not the same. This is where we get slippery. Well, it's neither the same nor the other, and people say, these Madhyamikans, they're such, such rat bags, they're slippery. But it really is just to illustrate the validity of the position of dependent arising, in which there is no inherent, you could say, reality with regards to neither the cause nor the result, but particularly here. So it applies that then, that if cause and result, then they're both situated in the present, as Khenchen Palden Sherab says, do they touch? Because if they are touching, yeah, then they're not really cause and effect, yeah, because the cause, yeah, in terms of temporally, then there is this development from past into the future, as along the lines of something developing as something then is destroyed. So we're basically just saying that that there is a dependency, but it's not as if the seed and the result, they are necessarily other. Now that we refuted the two other possibilities, it simply applies, and this we'll see again, that the idea that results arise neither from self nor other, we've conceded that nothing can arise from the self and then other. So the sort of the slippery philosophical view then sort of saying, well, you know, it's neither this nor that, or from both, is just not an option. I think it should say from both self and other, yeah? But anyway, that, yeah, the result is that they arise neither from self nor other. Yeah, people might say, well, they arise from both. And then there's the fourth option, which is phenomena arise from nothing. Yeah, neither of them. Yeah, and then philosophers might say, well, you know, it's neither self nor other, you know, it is inconceivable. But that sort of inconceivability is just completely, you can say, unsubstantiated, because as far as arising goes, when we talk about something arising, it means that necessarily anything that arises has to arise due to some dependency. What we're of course going to come around is to say that nothing truly comes into existence, just like we would say in a dream. Nothing truly arose in the dream. There was projections and there's assumptions, but actually there's no true phenomena taking place. Now this is huge in terms of our ordinary perception in the world. And so this is, like I said, this is hard logic. But the point is, nobody really cares about what the Buddhists are onto, because nobody cares about enlightenment. Nobody thinks about that we could actually develop the qualities of the subjectivity beyond confusion. This doesn't really arise in Western philosophy or phenomenology. That idea, and this is actually very interesting, because initially you could say, or rather what's happening a lot in some of the research that we're having now around, you could say, Buddhist science, is that the idea that we could actually improve the quality of the subjectivity, that's completely unknown. Someone like Alan Wallace is proposing that, and that's of course what's implicit in mindfulness and so on. The idea that we could shift and transform the subjectivity is rarely spoken about. And that's, of course, what the Buddha is about, someone who removed confusion. And as a result, then it's important that we undermine some of the stubborn assumptions that we have about reality. And so for most of science, that doesn't apply, because we're really just about measuring and understanding, quantifying, and understanding the function of our reality. But nobody really looks into, you could say, the actual nature, except, yes, we then have quantum physics and we have various branches of physics that do look into this. And they also come up with the same thing, that you cannot actually find any ultimate building block of phenomena, as much as we have some sort of, you could say, projects, you know, the CERN accelerator and whatnot. Then, in fact, there's plenty of physicists that would say actually what we refer to as a reality is very much an idea. Anyway, the point here is that we want to establish that our assumptions and our projections with regards to some existence of solid reality is very problematic. Again, it applies, and this is where, of course, now I'm this is almost at the point of brainwashing that we are repeating things, but it's good if you leave this study and you just remember, gosh, he went on about this a lot, then there's there will have been some benefit from this, and that is repeating again, relative truth functions, but we cannot say in absolute that there's any reality, right? So that's why we use the word, and this is good, useful vocab. Relative truth functions, but it cannot withstand analysis, meaning if we analyze, if we go in and begin to say what, why, where, and so on, that's where everything comes undone. That's why if somebody sits and spouts some truth, this is how it is, this is the truth, then you just need one other person that says why or questions. And all of a sudden things become less, you could say, rigid in their dogmatic truth. Once we begin to question, once we begin to analyze, we see things are essentially they're there, but they're very relative to who is seeing it and how. So relative truth functions, but cannot withstand analysis, meaning the assumptions around the identity of phenomena, it works, but doesn't withstand analysis. I'm called Jakob, but in fact what's called Jakob is just a conglomerate. It's some sort of constructs. Yeah? So phenomena appear, yet they are unborn. Now this is an important word, this unborn, and that's also what Khenchen Palden Sherab is saying. We find this a lot in the teachings, that we say things are unborn, meaning they haven't truly come into existence. And that's an important point. They appear, yet there is nothing about them that actually ever attains any status of being inherently truly existing. Everything, if you like, is fluid, is in process. So what we're doing here in terms of our study, Khenchen Palden Sherab very wisely, before we get too philosophical and carried away, just establishes how we need to reaffirm our motivation, which is that we wish to liberate all sentient beings from delusion and establish the enlightenment. And that's what we're doing with the study. Establish a view and eventually use this view to meditate so that we can liberate all sentient beings. So what we're doing right now is we're grasping the theory, understanding what Vipassana is about, and then we're going to apply it in the practice of meditation. And this doesn't mean that Vipassana in the sense that in the Burmese tradition, this means the wisdom that has wider perspective, and this permeates everything that has to do in the entire Buddhist path. So it doesn't mean it doesn't matter which tradition we're in. This view of emptiness, this view of understanding reality is the basis for all the Buddhist practices. In the Sutra vehicle, we practice Shamatha Vipassana. In the Vajrayana, we integrate this vision of reality through the practice of the development stage and completion stage. And so in this way, this is incredibly valuable. It's indispensable for our journey. So we are dedicated to persevering in the three prajnas: the hearing, the wisdom of hearing, the wisdom of reflecting, and the wisdom of meditation. So remember that all of this is founded on logic and rational analysis, not belief. So when we're establishing the view now, that we apply some logic and rational analysis. Of course, the nature itself is ultimately beyond, you could say, logic and rationality. It's not linear. But to initially understand why our assumptions of reality are flawed, we need to apply rational analysis. Yes, when we go into the Vajrayana, when we go into, you could say, the inconceivable nature of reality, yeah, that's beyond the narrow linear parameters of logic. But as far as us getting to the bottom of understanding our deception, logic and rationality is very helpful. And we're not just adopting the Buddha's, belief. you know, saying, oh yeah, if the Buddha said so, then that's true. So, two truths and emptiness, all of that we know what they use. The word is objects of knowledge, and that means anything that can be objectified. All phenomena, basically. They can be known in terms of what they intrinsically are and then how they appear to us. So we have the level of appearance and the level of how things actually are. Absolute truth and relative truth. Now, this division is not something that's just the Buddha invented. It's really just a way of just understanding reality. So the object of the two truths, understanding that relatively we perceive things in one way, but its ultimate nature, the ultimate nature of what we're looking at, absolute truth, that's reality, dhammata, reality in itself. And the reason for doing that is simply that if we don't recognize the paper tiger for being a paper tiger, then we think it's real, then we're deceived and we suffer. Well, if we think that the striped rope is a snake, then we suffer. So when we use these reasonings, for example, we say form is emptiness, emptiness is form. It doesn't mean that the Buddha said, okay, this is what you need to know and just repeat after me. It's like, he said that? What does he mean? So we need to establish that, not just repeat it. And as far as what we're looking at here, these 5 reasonings, there's just one of them would be enough. If we can understand this first one we're looking at here, the emptiness of causation, that is good enough. And this is also why they referred to, by the way, it says, what was it? It said Vajra splinters, right? Or the tiny Vajras. See, the Tibetan Dorje Segma, yeah? Segma just means splinters. It means it's like little glass splinters. They really get into things, and so they penetrate and destroy everything. So if we just get that one reasoning, but we do use the other reasonings as well, so we're going to go through another one today. But when we do that, we use logic, Rigpa. Like I said before, when we use logic, it's not that difficult. We're just saying, if you're leaving Sydney, it means you can't be approaching Sydney. That's logic. It's not particularly possible to understand. Something that's permanent cannot be impermanent. But we can make a case for these things that we say. So we have reasonings. So we can, for example, saying that the cause and the result, the seed and the sprout, cannot, you could say, we can't say that they are inseparable. And so we apply reasons. We show with examples, rice seed, rice sprouts. That's reasoning. And this all leads to an understanding that is, you could say, valid cognition, where we're actually looking at things with a clear understanding. Valid logic and reasoning exists a little bit like universals, so they're more in the objective side. Valid cognition is more specific. It's what we can, but it is valid in the sense that when we use logic, we arrive at a sort of a clear understanding. But also, valid cognition has to do with the subject that is able to ascertain whether something really has value or not. If I, for example, might say to a 5-year-old, hey, seed and the and the sprout, they could never be the same. The 5-year-old probably would just say whatever, So there has to be a subject that actually can see, that actually has ramifications. So that's where you could say the valid cognition is essential. And so all of this operates within what we also call epistemology, that it is sound, you could say, coherent science. Anyway, the objects that we're analyzing falls into our reality. We're looking at causes, we're looking at results, and we're also looking at the nature. You could say there's the cause being the rice seed, then we have the rice sprout. There's some nature, there's some sort of thing that's a red thread, or there's some, you could say, nature that is basic to the rice seed and the rice sprout. And so this is what we're analyzing. So overall is that with this first great reasoning, we are addressing the belief in an absolute causation. So that is something that undermines our assumptions around reality at the basis of how they come about. And when we do that, we establish how phenomena, they are definitely appearing, they're definitely here, but they don't have any intrinsic ultimate value, any intrinsic existence. And as such, when we use this analysis, we see actually, yes, there's appearances, but actually there's nothing that has actually come into existence ultimately. And that enables us to be free from our delusion and suffering. I've had a dream that I had, a lover, I had a friend, I had something, or I had an enemy and a fight, or whatever dream I had. At the end, I wake up. Yes, I had all the perceptions, but nothing actually had ever come truly into existence. So once we've covered this and we've actually used this logic, and we're going to have to do it ourselves, then actually we go, yes, there's actually nothing real about this. Then we can relax. So this has profound implications. So we're in no way, you could say, just doing this as a sort of a game. This is very important. Khenchen Palden Sherab says, we have already examined then the 4 different ways that phenomena could be born and logically established that each possibility collapses upon itself. Since there are no other alternatives in terms of production, we have proven that birth does not exist on the absolute level. So we can relax and settle our minds regarding this issue. This logic applies equally to all phenomena. This doesn't mean that you have to go out and talk with your, scientific friends and say, hey, nothing's actually ever happened. You don't have to deny the Big Bang or whatever. All of these are just relative constructions, and they're just interested in the functioning. Nobody's interested in really understanding the intrinsic reality of phenomena because they're not really into identifying the basic ignorance of the subjective. And so we needn't actually disagree with anybody. It's only if somebody wants wisdom, then they're going to have to relinquish some of these positions. Once we have wisdom, then we're more relaxed. And as a result, we have less kleshas and less karma. But that's a whole different, you could say, objective than the ordinary scientist. Now, the second great reasoning of Madhyamaka is then, I was just a little bit sort of concerned with the translation there where it says so literally this means this analysis that, this reasoning that analyzes the arising and ceasing from something existing or non-existent. So basically this is what we're doing in the second one. We're talking about the existence and non-existence of phenomena. And that is really, we think about things in terms of first they could exist in terms of their causation, but then once things appear, then we can also look into that they are existing, they appear to exist. And so we can look at it from that angle. So in that way, there's not a single phenomena that is not, you could say, a result of being some relatively caused and then existing. In that way, everything that we experience right now appears to exist, and what we are experiencing right now becomes the cause of future phenomena. But so in relative speak, yes, phenomena are here, they are caused and they appear, but what we're now looking into is there is any absolute existence about what we're experiencing. So again, we analyze then how phenomena then would something that is already existing does not require creation, birth. So as far as then, if things already existed, then there would be no need for them to be created. Yeah. So if it did arise as something already existing, it would be duplicate and continue endlessly. So we don't have an absolute existence. Phenomena are necessarily caused, and if there was already the existence in the cause, then it would just continue duplicating infinitely. As we said before, if cause and result was the same, then also then the seed wouldn't cease, and also it would continually duplicating. So that's with regards to existence. As far as phenomena arising from non-existence goes, if the cause being non-existent, we can say there, then also it would apply that the result would be non-existent. That's also according to our logic. Yeah? If there was a non-existent cause, then there would be nothing. They would be creating nothing. So that's, again, the logic. Results come into existence. They cannot come into existence from non-existing causes. So the one here, the one before, phenomena, they don't arise from existence, because if they're already existing, well, what's the point? Yeah. So as far as this, this computer that I'm looking at goes, it didn't arise from existence. It arose due to dependent arising. There wasn't something already existing. So phenomena don't arise from already pre-existing identity. No such a thing exists. And also, it's not as if phenomena are going to arise from non-existence. Nothing either. So this is really just refuting the idea that there would be either something arising from something that is an already existing, or then there's some non-existence. Yeah. So this is really just looking at the two possibilities of existence and non-existence. Then we go into the sort of the philosophical thing about saying, well, somebody might say, well, maybe phenomena arise from both. Some sort of wonderful mix of existence and non-existence, and this is where we have to apply the logic again. It's not hard, but it needs to be said that existence and non-existence, they're incompatible. You don't have existent and non-existent things as one sort of a mix that we throw together, right? So we refute that. And then finally, I apologize, I couldn't help myself here, that phenomena do not arise from nothingness. Then it says, we might have heard in some of the musical movies that we grew up with, nothing comes from nothing. Okay? So everything as such then, in that nothing has any true inherent existence. And this is what we can look at then in terms of their causation. There's nothing comes out of already pre-existing causes. There's pre-existing existence or non-existence. Then we have to say there actually is nothing that inherently exists. So we say all existing phenomena are emptiness. Then again, let's just face it. We definitely attribute existence on phenomena. That's what we do. Gullible people like myself continually attribute solidity on phenomena. And that's where I then look to His Holiness Dalai Lama. I look at my teachers and I say, they're not fooled in the same way. And as a result, hey, they're doing so well. They're extraordinary kind persons. They're not anguished because they don't get what they want, or they're not furious, or they're not, deluded. They're just clear and also not caught up in their own little, shtick. Then they're amazingly compassionate persons. So this actually is important. Now, like the Khenpo was saying, it's not as if we're going around and then we're going to say, the mountain is empty, everything's empty. That's not going to work. And we can't do that. And so and the Buddha actually very wisely, as far as the relative truth goes, it's like we have this quote from the meeting of the Yapsejere, which is the meeting of parent and child, in which the Buddha says, whatever the worldly people say, I agree. Just relatively speaking. Of course, absolutely, yes, that's a whole different matter, but that's not the scope of ordinary persons. They're not looking for liberation. Again, this analysis is not a game, it's not a language game, it is about us establishing the view. So, I was really bad. I didn't stop at 7 o'clock. Let me see if there are. I'm going to just go through some of the questions. Logically, on a round planet, if you leave Sydney from the north, you are approaching Sydney from the south. Oh, yes. So true. So true. Well, okay, you can say that you can say that to your wife when if you're leaving you're, you're leaving home, you can say, I'm on my way home. You're leaving home, and then you can say, oh, honey, I'm actually on my way home. So see how that works. As is first saying interdependence disproves it? Yes, that's right. Dependent arising disproves that phenomena would arise from itself or from other or from both or neither. That's what we're saying. See, what we're doing with interdependence is introducing the idea of conditioning, that there is no absolutes in terms of the cause or in terms of the result. So they both, all of this is actually just introducing dependent arising. That phenomena exist on the basis of they're dependent. And that's the beauty of phenomena. We're not stuck with any absolutes. Last night's dinner and tonight's dinner are other than each other. That's questionable, you know. Where do you have last night's dinner? It only exists in your memory. So it doesn't really function as other in terms of, okay, well, I'm up against somebody who's how do you say, a seasoned Madhyamakan. So I have to be careful what I say here, but it's certainly, I think the point that's being made here, okay, last night's dinner and tonight's dinner are other than each other, even though they don't coexist temporarily. Yeah, that's the point. So this seems to violate the premise of the second premise for non-causation. Yeah, this seems to violate the premise of the second premise for non-causation. I think all that's being said here is for us to ascertain the idea of production from other, then the other has to necessarily function as other. And that's what I think the point is being made here, that we're actually talking about dependent arising and not necessarily as other. I think that's the point that's being made. Is space a dependent phenomena? For example, it depends on an absence of form. Well, actually, we would say that the space is, along with things like time, that it's a demin-duce. What is it again? Non-associated compositional factor. All right? So if you're comfortable with the word non-associated compositional factor, that is what we call it in the Abhidharma. So as such, it is still yes, it is a dependent phenomenon, but it's not something that we can grasp. Yeah, also time is such. For the view of ultimate reality, can it then simply be said that rebirth does not exist? Yes, definitely. From the point of view of ultimate reality, yes, there's no rebirth. And that's where people like, well, I shan't mention, but some slippery persons who sort of want to think that Buddhism doesn't endorse rebirth. Yeah, they'll take ultimate reality and say, oh yeah, there's no rebirth, because the Buddha said, there's no, existence, non-existence, and so forth. Sure. Therefore, all play of appearances can only ever be part of the view of relative reality. Yes, it's true. So the play of appearances, they manifest as external phenomena that are objectified, and as a result then we have the dualism that then propels the sense of self that is then continually on the basis of causes and conditions propelled through a shifting of this of the experience of a life. So we do on a relative level have rebirth, Just like we on a relative level have New York City. We can't say there's an absolute New York City, but for the time being it does seem very real. And as long as we have a notion of self, then there's continually perpetuating the experience of the 12 links of dependent arising that creates rebirth. Does space exist relatively or at all? Or is it a kind of non-affirming negation? A simple absence of anything. Space is just a phenomenon that, as you say, it's a dependent arising on the basis of the absence of anything. Yes, it has no appearance or form, so it is not emptiness. Oh, yeah. Well, the thing about emptiness is that emptiness doesn't just mean that there's nothing there. So, emptiness also is empty of being, of emptiness. As long as we say empty, well, obviously it's relative to something that's not empty. This might sound a little bit sort of, how do you say, just like language games again, but it really just that we're ultimately not about objectifying or establishing emptiness as something like space. Yeah? So yes, it has no appearance or form, so it's not emptiness, i.e. appearance and emptiness inseparable. Yeah. Space has appearance and emptiness. It's apparent in its, you could say, spaciousness, and that spaciousness in itself is not any absolute. So space is definitely unity of appearance and emptiness. Maybe it's empty, but not emptiness. Well, you see, when we say emptiness, we're not just saying that there's nothing there, right? We're saying emptiness. It's really just a metaphor for the, you could say, insubstantiality or the non-objectifiability of phenomena. Look, the process of approaching this is one in which we just have to continually work with our, you could say, habitual assumptions, and then gradually try and just play. See, as a Buddhist, I can't just right away say, oh, I embrace everything the Buddha said, but I can give Buddha the benefit of the doubt. And so that's where these perspectives that we have from Nagarjuna, Aryadeva, and so forth, they're intended to be provocations, and we should really just use ourselves as, you could say, a laboratory and see, how does this work? So just a few more. So Nagarjuna, famously, and his main student, Aryadeva, are the ones that really were key to, you could say, formulating what the Buddha had taught. We use these kind of reasonings on the basis of the writings. All the 5 reasonings that we're talking about here, they're implicit in all the various Buddhist sutras. So we have then these refutations, and then the first one from cause I already went through. Then that's the one from Nagarjuna, and this is J. Garfield's translation. Neither from itself, nor from another, nor from both, nor without a cause does anything whatever anywhere arise. Yeah, that's J. Garfield's translation. Aryadeva, he's more about the existent. So then and this is according to the translation that we have here from the translator of this work, he says, birth of something existent is not logical. Birth of something non-existent is like a flower in the sky, also not possible. Both notions, birth from existence and non-existence, are illogical. Both notions, birth from existence and from neither existence nor non-existence, is also illogical. Sorry, that the last line, I think I'm going to have to go back. There's something not quite right there. Let's just have a look. Sorry if I'm going a little bit over time, but I don't think anybody's surprised. Both notions, birth from existence. Oh, sorry, I'm just repeating it. So the final line should read, therefore, the wise should not cling to any views. Oh, that's so important. I apologize, I got that wrong. So please refer to your book, bottom line, the very last line on page 106. Therefore, the wise should not cling to any views. Yeah. So that's what we're doing ultimately. So this is not just evil hard math or philosophy. It's really just that we are eliminating the addiction to dogma. So again, and this is of course Khenchen Palden Sherab saying we should reaffirm our bodhicitta resolve. And then there's something really important, which is our understanding of clarity and emptiness. We're going to be going through this, where we say this mind, and what we're now establishing, it's empty, it's intangible, yet, and this is very important, it possesses cognizance, clarity. Yeah? When, by the way, in Buddhism we say clarity, it doesn't mean that we're feeling clear or we are not confused. It just means that basic cognizance that we possess, that mind knows. Cognizance is an excellent word because just means knowing. And you can be depressed, you can be elated, you can be happy, sad, whatever. You always have cognizance. It doesn't matter how the mind is, but it has this capacity of being cognizant. Intrinsically, yes, it's not confused. So we could say its intrinsic nature is clarity. But even so, what we talk about as far as the mind's clarity nature, it pervades both confusion and awakening. Now, it's when we mistake the nature of the mind that its natural qualities are veiled. So you could say the natural qualities of the mind is Buddha nature that possesses love, wisdom, and strength. And so with the path, these qualities are what we then, you could say, basically are making manifest. It's just like we're naturally healthy. We can be, if we have a temporary curable condition, then when we address that, then naturally our basic health becomes manifest. Khenchen Rinpoche, he said in this regard, in the practice of Mahamudra, Dzogchen meditation, it's very helpful to have an intellectual understanding of the correct view of reality, which is emptiness. Indeed, it's very difficult to meditate on emptiness directly unless such an understanding of emptiness is first developed. If we do not have an intellectual understanding of emptiness, then when we meditate, it's easy to make the mistake of taking some similar experience in our meditation as being emptiness. And you have this, there was some, when we introduce, for example, the idea of Rigpa or the idea of wisdom, somebody said, oh, I wonder if this is it. And of course, what this Rigpa, this wisdom is when we are not objectifying and clinging. And there's an open and describable quality. But see, this quality is not owned by us. This is where we could say it has nothing to do with our comfort zone. If we would identify something as emptiness, and then we say, I found emptiness, it would just be appropriated in the name of our ego, in the name of consolidating our comfort zone. That's why it's so important when we practice meditation that we're always willing to go out of our comfort zone. The 6 paramitas is all about giving, going out of our sort of holding on. And so in that sense, the understanding of emptiness is never something that we can objectify and own. It's in fact when the owner and the whole idea of ownership begins to sort of dissolve and become irrelevant, then yes, there could possibly be some sense of, you could say, valid understanding. But again, we need to confer with our meditation teacher, our guru, to find out if that is then a proper understanding. As far as the theory goes, it's so important that we understand what we're looking at here, that there's nothing in terms of our subjective dimension or objective dimension that has absolute identity. So Khenchen Palden Sherab says, even though phenomena are without a substantially inherent existing core, they are so beautiful, endless, and uninterrupted. So that's talking from the point of view of the, you could say, the intrinsic nature of reality. The clarity of the nature unceasingly sparks forth, transmuting and transforming, emanating and merging, coming and going in a great show of nature. How beautiful! Within the endless display of appearances, there's nothing whatsoever to grasp or hold. So this is, you could say, coming from the point of view of the view, that we then understand what reality innately is. And that's these kind of, we have a lot of beautiful writings like that from Longchen and from the great sages. And this is, of course, what they're encouraging us to have a look. And this is where we want to vaccinate ourselves against this duality that prevents us from experiencing, you could say, the intrinsic nature or the reality itself. So as far as then this intangible nature of emptiness and the knower, the clarity, is concerned, they are inseparable. So we're not talking about two different things, emptiness on one hand and then the one that knows on the other. It's like inseparable. So we have the example of molasses and sweetness, or heat and fire. Yeah, they're not two different things. What we do is when we get stuck on appearances, we miss the emptiness aspect. And that's where the Buddha is going in. And just like we were sitting in a theater and getting caught up in the plot, then somebody taps us gently on the shoulder and saying, tells us it's just a movie. Yeah. There's a teaching Tongse Khyentse Rinpoche gave where it's called Life is Cinema. It was published in Shambhala Sun, so you can Google that. I think it's up there somewhere. Hence we suffer. When we miss that point, we suffer. And hence we need to have the remedy of this path that sort of goes in and says, it's not real. And there's an important point, which is emptiness endowed with the qualities of enlightenment is referred to as emptiness endowed with all the supreme aspects. This is an important point. So we're not just saying that emptiness is a non-affirmative negation. We could potentially refer to it as an affirmative negation when we are saying that it's emptiness endowed with all the supreme aspects. But with that, we could also go beyond even the dichotomy between non-affirmative negation and affirmative negation and just simply say the nature is inconceivable. And that's where Mipan Rinpoche, he goes beyond some of the squabbling that would go on between the Rangtong and the Shentong. So, I think we're getting towards the end here, people. Thank you for hanging in there. The display of our mind appears to be external. Yet, these are just projections. And when we don't see the nature of phenomena, we begin to then objectify phenomena and we begin to label things. I like, I don't like, this is that, that is that, and this is this. So this is what we call dualistic labeling. And that has nothing to do with the phenomena itself. The chair next to me, the lava lamp next to me, doesn't think I am a lava lamp or I am a chair. These are just us labeling it, and there's no intrinsic truth about these. So it is, in fact, just dualistic labeling or imagination. And all the Buddhist schools, they're about challenging our assumptions about these labels. So that's the last point that the Khenpo does. And so for the next time, we're going to be having our last session. And so please read the end of the book. We're going to be covering the last two great Madhyamaka reasonings, and we come to the point in the book where there's dedication. So that's it. Let me just check if there's any more questions. No? Yes, the wise not holding on to any views suggest a mind set beyond mind, beyond intellect, understanding, and an iota of defining. Yes, that is what the Buddha was on about. And remember, before that we began the course, I suggested that you guys read this, or at least in the first session I mentioned, it's really delightful little thing on this, what we call the 14 unanswered questions of the Buddha, where the Buddha just kept silent. Didn't want to define anything. And that's very beautifully presented by Wilson Fletcher in his Introduction to the Middle Way. So I uploaded a PDF. I think it's called The Silence of the Buddha, probably. Yeah. But that is it. So, hey, for all of these words, at the end, we're just encouraged to, you could say, not be deceived, not be fooled, but then settling in some sort of space of being vaccinated against deception. Hopefully, that's what we're doing with the middle way. Thank you. By this merit, may all attain omniscience, may it defeat the enemy wrongdoing, from the stormy waves of birth, old age, sickness and death, From the ocean of samsara, may all beings be freed. May bodhicitta, precious and sublime, arise where it has not yet come to be, and where it has arisen, may it never fail, but grow and flourish ever more and more. Thank you.